1965 didn't just change music, it redefined what pop and rock could be. Teenagers had their radios glued to the dial. Bands were evolving, experimenting, pushing boundaries. This wasn't background music, it was revolution, pressed into vinyl and blasted through transistor speakers. The world didn't slow down to listen, it sped up to keep up. 60 years later, those same songs still echo in stadiums, playlists, and movie soundtracks. You know them by heart. You've heard them in supermarkets, on road trips, maybe at your parents' wedding, but what you might not realize is that they all came from the same unforgettable year 1965. And today, they're turning 60. Let's hit play. It started with a guitar riff that came to Keith Richards in a dream. By the time he woke up and recorded it, the tape was already running. What followed was a defining moment in rock history. Satisfaction was raw, rebellious, and loud. It captured a generation's frustration with consumerism, conformity, and everything their parents stood for. Mick Jagger didn't just sing the lyrics, sneered them. It wasn't about love or heartbreak, it was about noise, electricity, and that gnawing sense of wanting more. The fuzzed-out guitar sound was unlike anything on the radio, and that's exactly why it hit like a bomb. It was banned from some stations, and that only made it bigger. Released in the middle of the British invasion, Satisfaction proved the Rolling Stones weren't just riding the wave, they were creating it. This song didn't ask for permission. It took over the airwaves and never let go. 60 years later, the riff still bites, and the anger still feels fresh. While guitars raged and long hair took over stages, one voice brought elegance and escapism to the chaos. Downtown wasn't rebellion, it was refuge. Petula Clark painted a world of city lights and freedom, where you could lose your worries and find your rhythm. The orchestration was grand, the melody instantly memorable. In a year dominated by rock and roll noise, Downtown stood out by offering something different. It felt cinematic, like the opening scene of a stylish European film, but it was grounded in real emotion. It wasn't bubblegum, it was beautifully built pop, crafted with precision. Clark became the first British woman to top the American charts since World War II, and she did it not by imitating trends, but by setting her own. 60 years later, Downtown still invites you to escape just for 3 perfect minutes. Folk met rock in a perfect collision when the Byrds released Turn, Turn, Turn. Adapted from Ecclesiastes and set to jangly electric guitars, the song felt both ancient and brand new. It was a prayer, a protest, and a pop single all in one, and somehow it worked. The Byrds didn't just plug in folk music, they elevated it. Roger McGuinn's 12-string guitar shimmered, while harmonies soared with a quiet kind of power. The lyrics spoke of seasons, change, and the inevitability of time, and in a year marked by conflict and upheaval, it hit a nerve. This wasn't rock for the sake of noise, it was rock for reflection. And 60 years later, Turn, Turn, Turn reminds us that music can be timely and timeless, speaking across generations without ever raising its voice. From the first deep vocal note to the crashing chorus, this was more than a love song, it was a sonic avalanche. Produced by Phil Spector using his famous wall of sound, You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin' filled every inch of the speakers with emotion. When the Righteous Brothers sang it, Heartbreak wasn't quiet, it was cinematic. Bill Medley's baritone led the way, aching with regret, while Bobby Hatfield soared in harmony. The production was massive, but the sentiment was intimate. This wasn't teenage pop, it was grown-up vulnerability. A moment of love slipping away, stretched out over nearly 4 minutes. For many, it was the first time a breakup sounded like an opera. The song topped charts on both sides of the Atlantic and became one of the most played songs in radio history. 60 years later, it still swells with drama, passion, and that unmistakable sense of loss. It didn't just raise the bar, it tore the ceiling off the room. It's upbeat, it's catchy, and yet, at its core, it's a cry for help. John Lennon wrote "Help" during a time of rising fame and private confusion.
Not just anybody.
He was surrounded by millions but felt alone, and this song became his honest release. On the surface, it's perfect pop, bright harmonies, quick tempo, singable chorus. But if you really listen, you'll hear something deeper. Lennon's voice carries urgency, and the lyrics reveal a man unraveling. The Beatles were at the peak of Beatlemania, and this track was one of the first hints that the ride was starting to shake. Help marked a turning point. The Beatles were no longer just boys with guitars, they were evolving, writing songs that reflected the world inside their heads. Even now, it remains one of the most relatable cries ever recorded, disguised as a hit. No one expected a 6-minute single to change the rules. But then again, no one else was Bob Dylan. Like a Rolling Stone, shattered expectations in every way. It was bitter, brilliant, and uncompromising. A sneer wrapped in poetry aimed at a world that had fallen from grace. The organs swirled, the drums pounded, and Dylan's voice half spit, half sermon carried the weight of every disillusioned soul. It wasn't just a song, it was a manifesto. How does it feel? Wasn't just a question, it was a challenge to anyone pretending to have it all figured out. Radio stations hesitated at first, unsure what to do with a track that broke the 3-minute rule. But it didn't matter. The world caught up fast. 60 years later, Like a Rolling Stone still feels dangerous, like a fuse that's always about to spark again.
I'm not half the man I used to be.
It's quiet, just a voice and a string quartet. But in that simplicity lies something eternal. Yesterday was unlike anything the Beatles had done before. Paul McCartney woke up with a melody in his head and feared it was something he'd accidentally stolen. What he had, in fact, was one of the most covered songs in history. There's no drum beat, no harmonies, no electric guitar, just regret, floating in melody. McCartney recorded it solo, marking a rare moment of vulnerability under the Beatles' name. The lyrics spoke of something lost, and the music wrapped that sadness in beauty. It didn't shout, it whispered, and the world leaned in to listen. In a decade of noise and rebellion, Yesterday proved that silence could be just as powerful. 60 years on, it's still being sung, still being felt, and still reminding us how timeless a broken heart can be. When the Byrds took a Bob Dylan song and plugged it into a 12-string electric guitar, something revolutionary happened. Mr. Tambourine Man turned poetry into pop. It didn't lose its message, it gained a new sound, and with it, a new audience. Only one member of the band actually played on the recording, but that didn't matter. The combination of folk lyrics and jangly guitars created a new genre overnight, folk rock. Dylan's words still carried weight, but now they shimmered with a California glow. It was introspection dressed in radio polish. The Byrds weren't just covering a song, they were reshaping the scene. Mr. Tambourine Man opened doors for artists to experiment, to fuse, to invent. And 60 years later, its echo still lingers in every folk rock chord that dares to dream. It opens like a wave, rising slowly before crashing into harmony. California Girls wasn't just a tribute, it was a sonic postcard from the West Coast. Brian Wilson's production turned surf music into pop art. He wasn't just singing about girls, he was sculpting sound. With layered vocals, orchestral textures, and that unmistakable beat, the Beach Boys captured the essence of summer. The song painted a world where the sun always shines and heartbreak never lasts long. But beneath the fun was genius. Brian Wilson was already pushing the limits of what pop music could be. California Girls became more than a hit. It became part of American identity. And even now, 6 decades later, it still sounds like sunshine bottled into song. It begins with just a bass line and instantly, you know it. My Girl isn't just a love song, it's a statement, smooth and confident, wrapped in Motown perfection. Written by Smokey Robinson and Ronald White, it became the Temptations' first #1 hit and their defining anthem. David Ruffin's voice is both tender and powerful, a perfect match for lyrics that feel like sunshine. The arrangement is rich but never overwhelming, built on horns, strings, and rhythm that dance together. This wasn't loud rock, it was velvet soul with muscle, and it had just as much impact. Though rooted in soul, My Girl crossed over effortlessly into the rock and pop consciousness of the time. 60 years later, it still plays at weddings, reunions, and road trips, wherever love is real and timeless. It's not just about a girl, it's about the feeling no one wants to lose.
She's a big teaser.
The riff hits first sharp, teasing, unforgettable. Day Tripper isn't a love song or a ballad, it's the Beatles showing teeth, moving into harder, funkier territory.
Got a good reason.
Released as a double A side in December, it gave listeners a taste of the creative risks that were coming. John Lennon's lyrics play with dual meaning, cheeky and suggestive, while Paul McCartney's bass keeps it grounded. The song pulses with a new confidenceless innocence, more bite. It's still pop, but it's pop with an edge, with blues undercurrents and psychedelic whispers sneaking into the background. Day Tripper proved the Beatles could be fun, subversive, and musically daring all at once. 60 years later, the riff alone is enough to turn heads and spark nostalgia. It wasn't just a trip. It was the beginning of the next chapter in rock. It wasn't meant to be a revolution, but Hang On Sloopy took a forgotten tune and turned it into a national anthem for teenagers. Originally recorded as My Girl Sloopy by the Vibrations, it found new life in the hands of a teenage band from Ohio. The McCoys gave it grit, bounce, and a dose of youthful swagger. With its infectious chorus and Beatles-style energy, it raced up the charts in the summer of 1965.
I'm in love with you.
It was fun, loud, and easy to shout in the car with your friends. The song became so beloved that it was eventually named the official rock song of Ohio. That's how deep it dug into the culture. Today, Hang On Sloopy still plays at sporting events, dive bars, and classic rock stations.
Well, Sloopy, let your hair down.
It reminds us that sometimes the most enduring hits are the ones that never tried too hard, just asked you to sing along.
Feel the fears I'm feeling today.
No song in 1965 rattled nerves like this one. Eve of Destruction wasn't just musicit, was a headline turned into a folk rock grenade.
I was that gun you told me.
Barry Maguire's voice cracked with urgency, and every lyric felt like a warning. Nuclear fears, civil rights, war, it was all there, wrapped in 2 minutes and change. Written by PFS Lone, the song was banned on some stations and attacked by critics. But it connected. It gave voice to the dread and disillusionment of a generation watching the world teeter.
Running away, there'll be no one to save.
In a time of Beatles harmonies and dance anthems, Eve of Destruction reminded listeners that reality couldn't be ignored. 6 decades later, its power hasn't faded. The anger still burns, and the questions still sting. It's a time capsule, but also a mirror. When Ticket to Ride was released, it wasn't just another pop hit, it was the sound of the Beatles growing up. The tempo dragged just slightly, the chords felt heavier, and the lyrics hinted at emotional detachment. This wasn't about holding hands anymore. Paul McCartney's bass lines were more complex. and Ringo Starr's drumming added weight instead of bounce. It was the first real sign that the Beatles were leaving the cheerful innocence of early hits behind. They were stepping into deeper, more introspective territory and taking their fans with them. Ticket to Ride may not be the flashiest Beatles song, but it's one of the most important. It signaled that something was shifting, and once it did, rock would never be the same. There was something darker brewing beneath the British invasion's polished surface. The Yardbirds, already known for launching guitar legends, released Evil-Hearted You as a stark, haunting contrast to the upbeat hits of the time. It was brooding, minor key, and driven by Jeff Beck's cinematic guitar work. Written by Graham Gouldman, the song climbed to number 3 on the British charts, but unlike other rock hits of the year, it didn't shout, it crept, it whispered accusations, it pulsed with tension. The production was clean, but the feeling was unsettled, like the calm before a storm that never fully ends. Evil-Hearted You never topped American charts, but it became a cult classic, a track that revealed just how wide the emotional range of rock could be. 6 decades later, its echo still lingers in the shadows of every band that dares to sound a little dangerous. 60 years later, these songs still pulse with life. They weren't just chart toppers, they were cultural touchstones. Each track captured a piece of a world in motion, a generation questioning everything and inventing something new. From jangly guitars to sweeping strings, from defiant lyrics to whispered regrets, the class of 1965 changed music and never left. They're not just songs turning 60, they're time machines disguised as melodies, still echoing in our lives. Which one of these do you still feel today? Subscribe for more stories that bring history's greatest music moments back to life and remind us why they still matter. What's the first song that moved you?